It was just past dawn when Henry left for his usual hunting trip. Mist clung to the Appalachian ridges like a living thing, swallowing the forest in silence. By nightfall, he hadn't returned, and by the next morning, there was only his rifle, carefully leaned against a tree. No footprints. No sign of struggle. Nothing but fog. Henry was an experienced hunter. In his 40s, rugged, familiar with every twist and ridge of these mountains. A man who thrived in the wilderness, who could read animal tracks like a book and navigate fog thicker than milk. To everyone in the small town, Henry wasn't just a hunter, he was a survivor. And yet, even he could vanish. The Appalachian fog in the early morning is different. It isn't just white, it bends light, muffles sound. Every snap of a twig feels magnified. The forest floor is damp, the air bitter against the skin. Miles of isolation stretch around you, and one misstep could send you tumbling down a ridge, unseen, unheard. Henry set out at dawn, rifle on his shoulder, boots crunching softly on wet leaves. He hummed a tune his late father used to whistle, trying to shake the creeping unease that fog always brought. Hours passed. The sun reached its peak, then dipped low, and Henry still hadn't returned. Concerned neighbors and fellow hunters scoured the ridges. Dogs tracked his scent, noses to the ground, but minutes later, they would stop, whining, confused. His scent ended in thin air, as if Henry had stepped into another world. After a week of searching, the townsfolk gave up. Henry had vanished. Whispers started among the locals. "Voices in the fog," they muttered. Stories of spirits that lured hunters off the trails, guiding them into the mist, and never letting them go. Then came the calls. At first subtle, static on the line, faint breathing, the tiniest whisper of Henry's name. Some hunters reported hearing their own names spoken in the fog weeks later. No one could explain it. Until 3 weeks later. It was a diner, 60 miles from the mountains. A barefoot man stumbled in, clothes shredded, face gaunt, eyes hollow. "Henry." The waitress froze. Other patrons turned. His body bore frostbite, malnutrition, signs of long exposure, yet the weather had been mild. He muttered incoherently, words swallowed by shivers. Finally, someone asked the question no one expected to hear the answer to. "Henry, where have you been?" He looked up, eyes wide and haunted. Voice barely audible. They led me back, but they said I'll have to return." A silence fell over the diner. Even the coffee machine's hiss seemed to stop. No one knew who they were. Ghosts? Spirits? Something older than the mountains themselves? Henry couldn't explain. He could only remember the whispers, guiding, circling, calling him into the fog. And the fear didn't end there. Even days later, locals reported hearing faint footsteps in the mist, calling names that weren't theirs. The ridge remained quiet, but nothing was ever the same again. Henry never went hunting alone after that. And sometimes, when the fog rolls down the ridges in the early morning, you could almost hear him whispering through the trees. "They said I'll have to return." It was just past 3 in the afternoon on a warm spring day in 1994 when Emily Carter left school. The sun had started dipping behind the tall oak trees that lined Maplewood Drive, casting long, twisting shadows across the cracked sidewalks. She waved to her friend for the last time, backpack slung over one shoulder, and turned down a narrow, quiet street. Everyone in town knew her, the quiet, shy girl with round glasses and a fascination with stories no one else seemed to care about. But on that day, she didn't look like herself. Witnesses later said she seemed distracted, as though she were talking to someone just out of sight. And then, just like that, she was gone. No footprints. No struggle. Nothing. Emily Carter was 15, bookish, and painfully shy. She spent her afternoons scribbling in her journal, reading urban legends, and cataloging ghost stories. Her friends remembered her often talking about doors and mirrors, and watchers in the fog. She liked the ordinary streets of her suburban neighborhood, the way the sun made long shadows on the sidewalks, and the quiet hum of houses tucked behind hedges. She walked home alone most days. It was her routine, a ritual. She liked the independence it gave her. But in her journal, Emily had written something strange just a week before her disappearance. Sometimes I feel eyes on me. Sometimes the reflections move before I do. The first night Emily didn't come home, her parents called friends, neighbors, and even the police. Every second stretched longer than the last. By the next day, the entire neighborhood was combed for any sign of her. They found nothing. No footprints, no scuffed grass, no broken branches, only the faint imprint of a school bag lying flat on the sidewalk near the last corner she had turned. As the days passed, small, inexplicable events began to occur. Her parents started receiving phone calls late at night. At first, just static. Then whispers. A voice, soft, familiar, repeating their names. Mom! Dad! Emily. No one was there when they picked up the phone, and no one could trace the calls. At school, Emily's locker was found to contain her journal, pages filled with cryptic sketches of mirrors, some broken, some whole, and notes that made little sense. Words like, "The glass has doors. The doors have voices. Listen when they call." Even local kids started whispering stories. They spoke of a woman who had vanished decades earlier on the same street, last seen near a broken mirror tossed in the trash. And slowly, the street itself changed. Long shadows seemed darker. Windows seemed to watch. Passers-by swore they heard footsteps behind them, soft but deliberate, and always fading when looked at directly. Weeks turned into months. The town's police searched every inch of Maplewood Drive, the surrounding woods, and abandoned houses, but Emily had disappeared without a trace. Neighbors spoke of seeing her from windows, only to find the streets empty when they ran outside. Her parents began to feel as though someone, or something, was inside the house, watching them. Small objects were moved. Mirrors reflected shadows that weren't there. And sometimes, her parents swore they saw her standing just beyond the threshold of their bedroom doors, only to vanish when approached. Then, almost exactly a year later, on a stormy night, Emily returned. It was 3 a.m. when Mr. and Mrs. Carter awoke to the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway. Their hearts pounded in unison. There she stood, wet, shivering, clothes plastered to her small frame, backpack clutched to her chest, hair dripping onto the floor. She looked exactly as she had the day she vanished. "Emily?" her mother whispered. Emily nodded slowly, eyes wide and empty. She didn't explain how she had returned. She simply said, I was just walking home." The parents hugged her tightly, refusing to let go. But something was off. Her eyes darted constantly toward every reflective surface. Mirrors, windows, even the polished silver of the doorknobs. She couldn't seem to look away. Over the next few weeks, her behavior grew stranger. She would stand for hours in front of mirrors, murmuring words no one could understand. Her journal, found in the attic, contained new entries. "They whisper my name. They show me doors. I can't stay. I can't leave. I must look. I must go." Then one night it happened. Emily screamed. The mirror in her bedroom cracked, jagged lines racing across the glass like lightning. Her parents rushed in, and she was gone. Shards of glass littered the floor. Her backpack lay untouched. Nothing else. No footprints. No note. No warning. Just the lingering echo of her scream. Weeks passed. Her parents never saw her again. The mirrors in the house were covered, discarded, but the feeling never left. Sometimes, at night, they swear they hear soft whispers. "I am here. I am watching. I must return." Somewhere, Emily walks a path between worlds, a place where mirrors whisper names, show doors that lead to nowhere, and watchful eyes follow the curious. And in her absence, the house feels the same as that quiet street where she first vanished, like the shadows themselves are alive, waiting for the next person who looks too long into the glass. It was a cold November morning in 1957 when the walls of Shaft 9 groaned. The miners below knew the sound, that low, resonant rumble that made your teeth chatter and your heart skip a beat. By the time the collapse came, it was too late. Timber beams splintered. Dust choked the tunnels. The earth swallowed men alive, leaving only darkness and the faint echoes of shouts that would never reach the surface. Weeks passed. Rescue crews dug tirelessly, pried through twisted metal, and braved the suffocating dust. But hope was lost. The town held a funeral. The miners were declared dead, and the shaft was sealed. No one ever expected any of them to come back. Tommy Reynolds had been part of the Shaft 9 crew for nearly a decade. Rugged, broad-shouldered, and with hands worn like old leather, he was the kind of man the other miners relied on in the dark. Tommy was superstitious. He carried a small charm, a tarnished silver coin, in his pocket and never entered the mine without whispering a short prayer. Old-timers warned him about things that dwell where the sun never shines. He laughed at some stories, feared others, but he respected the dark because he had seen it swallow men before. That morning, he kissed his wife, promised he'd be home by supper, and descended into Shaft 9. No one could have imagined it would be the last time anyone saw him, for decades. After the collapse, the town fell silent. Families mourned. The mine was cordoned off. Timber supports were braced and sealed over. But odd things started happening. Locals reported hearing hammering deep in the sealed shaft. Some swore they could hear footsteps echoing in the tunnels late at night. Others said they saw shadows, long, thin, moving figures, near the entrance. Old miners whispered in the tavern. They never left. Not really. The dark keeps him. Children playing near the mine sometimes came running home, pale and trembling, claiming they had seen men in the fog, standing just at the edge of the shaft, staring. And every once in a while, someone passing the mine at night would hear a faint voice calling a name, almost like a whisper from far below. "Tommy! Tommy!" The stories grew. Some said Tommy himself had never aged, that if you looked at him from the distance, he appeared as he did on that last day, sweaty and dust-streaked, before the earth claimed him. Time passed. Decades. The town modernized. Children grew up. The old miners passed away. Shaft 9 remained sealed, a dark scar on the hillside. But the tales refused to die. Hikers spoke of hearing breathing from below, of cold drafts seeping from cracks in the timbered shaft. A faint glow was sometimes seen deep within, though no one could explain how. Some brave souls, curious or drunk on folklore, tried to peer inside. Only black. Only silence. Only the lingering sense of being watched. And then, one morning, it happened. It was a foggy autumn morning in 1993, 36 years after the collapse. A small group of hikers noticed something unusual. A figure was emerging from the sealed shaft. At first, they thought it was a man lost in the woods. But as he stepped into the open, they froze. Tommy Reynolds. Alive. He was filthy, coated in dust and grime, clothes tattered, boots missing, face pale but unchanged. Not a day older than he had been when the mine collapsed. His eyes were wild. He muttered to himself, voice rasping, "They're still down there, waiting in the dark." Rescue teams were called immediately. Engineers pried open the reinforced entrance. Flashlights swept the tunnels, and what they found made their blood run cold. Skeletons. Decades-old bones littering the collapsed tunnel. And among them, a set of bones that matched Tommy Reynolds exactly. His own remains, as if he had emerged from the dead, yet somehow walked again. The living Tommy refused to answer questions. He simply stared at the investigators, shivering, whispering the same thing over and over. They said I had to come back. But they wait for the others. They're still there, waiting. No one could explain it. Scientists, historians, priests, all theories failed. It was as if the mine itself had reclaimed him, kept him, and then returned him to the surface to warn the living. The town never forgot that day. Tommy became a local legend. People said he would walk the outskirts of the mine at night, staring into the blackened opening. Sometimes he would speak to shadows no one else could see. Years later, the shaft was reopened, carefully, with cameras and lights. What was discovered was horrifying. Bones. Dozens of them. Every man lost in the collapse. And then, as if mocking reality, one skeleton, Tommy's, perfectly preserved. His face frozen in a silent scream. No one could understand how the man who had emerged alive could also be among the dead below. The story spread far and wide. Miners from neighboring towns refused to work in abandoned shafts. Children stayed away from the hillsides. And the fog, once benign, became something to fear. Locals swear that sometimes, on cold autumn mornings, you can hear footsteps from the mine. And if you listen closely, you might hear Tommy Reynolds whispering your name. Don't go down, they're waiting. And so the coal miner walks the line between life and death, a warning to anyone who thinks they can brave the dark below. Alive, yet already among the dead. Forever. It was past midnight when Kyle's voice echoed through the campsite. Guys, did you hear that? The others groaned. Sleep-deprived and tipsy from marshmallows and campfire stories, they tried to brush it off. But the sound persisted, a soft rustling, like dry leaves brushing against each other, moving closer to their tents. Kyle laughed nervously. Probably just a raccoon. Or a ghost, he said, joking. You guys remember the stories, right? About the old forest? People say it takes what it wants. Then, in a moment that none of them would ever forget, Kyle simply vanished. No scream. No struggle. Just gone. Kyle was the kind of guy everyone liked on campus. A 21-year-old college student with bright eyes and a restless energy, he loved exploring. Trails, rivers, caves, the wilder, the better. He often joked about local legends, laughing at stories of haunted woods or cursed spots. It's all just old people talking, he'd say, waving off warnings about staying on marked trails. He had come on this camping trip with 3 friends, Sarah, Marcus, and Liam, all from their outdoor club. Their plan was simple: hike, relax, tell stories, and disconnect from the busy college town for a weekend. Kyle's adventurous streak sometimes worried the others, but they knew he was capable, smart, quick-thinking, and always alert in the wilderness. He had a way of noticing things others wouldn't: broken twigs, distant animal calls, shifting shadows. The forest at night was unusually quiet. No wind rustled the moss-covered trees. Even the usual chorus of crickets seemed to hold its breath. The fog rolled in, thick and heavy, curling around trunks and roots, swallowing paths that only hours before they had marked clearly. Kyle had gone to check a strange sound near the edge of the campsite. A low, scraping noise, almost like claws on bark. He promised he'd be back in a minute. Minutes passed. The others called out. Kyle? You okay? Nothing. Sarah grabbed a flashlight. The beam cut through the fog, trembling in her hands. They searched in every direction: the trail, the riverbank, behind trees. His tent was undisturbed. His backpack lay neatly beside it. But Kyle? Gone. And then they saw it. A circle of symbols, carved into the dirt, faintly glowing in the moonlight. Strange, angular markings they couldn't understand. It felt alive, almost as if the forest itself had drawn them. The friends froze. None of them had ever seen anything like it. The symbols were precise, deliberate, and unnerving. "Maybe he fell?" Liam whispered. Sarah shook her head. "No, he would have left footprints." But there were none. Only the circle. Weeks passed, and Kyle remained missing. Searches turned up nothing. Dogs couldn't pick up a scent. The local police were baffled. It was as if he had been swallowed by the forest itself. Then came the sightings. First, a trucker on Interstate 40 reported seeing a disheveled man walking along the shoulder in the middle of the night. Clothes filthy, hair matted, eyes different. Strange. He didn't speak English, the driver said. Just guttural sounds. Kept pointing back toward the woods. Medical experts later confirmed something no one could explain. Kyle's eyes had changed color. A dark, almost black hue that no one had ever seen before. When doctors attempted hypnosis therapy to recover his memory, the words he spoke chilled him to the bone. "They don't want me here. I was supposed to stay with them." He screamed in a guttural language, a sound that was neither human nor animal, echoing in the sterile hospital room. His body shook violently, leaving deep marks on the examination table. The symbols carved into the dirt were found replicated on his clothing, scratches in the fabric, etched into his skin. The forest's mark had followed him. It was 4 months after his disappearance when Kyle staggered out of the woods and onto the interstate. He looked older, ragged, but something about him was wrong. Not in age, but in essence. He was the same Kyle they remembered, but changed. Hollow, haunted, and speaking in a tongue no one understood. His friends rushed to him, relieved and terrified all at once. They don't want me here," he said, voice breaking between guttural syllables. I was supposed to stay." The authorities took him in. Psychologists, doctors, and even local shamans tried to piece together what had happened. But his memory remained fractured. Flashbacks came in glimpses. Tall, shadowy figures in the fog. Doors made of glass, mirrors floating in the woods. Whispers of his name in a language no one recognized. Each night, he scratched symbols into paper, his skin, even his bed sheets. "They want me back! They will come!" he muttered in sleepless panic. Weeks later, Kyle's paranoia escalated. The symbols that had appeared on his clothing and skin were now carved into his arms. Deep, precise lines that matched the circle in the forest. One night, under heavy sedation, he screamed louder than ever. "They're coming!" he cried. "I was supposed to stay with them." The next morning, the nurses found him in his bed, gone. His arms were slashed, the same symbols etched deep into his skin. His body left only behind the marks. Friends and authorities searched for days, but Kyle was never seen again. The forest near the campsite remains off limits, yet hikers report strange whispers. Strange figures at the edges of fog. Circles of symbols etched into the dirt, faintly glowing when the moon is full. People say that if you wander too far off the trail, you might see a figure moving among the trees. A young man with eyes dark as night, repeating words in a language that isn't meant to be spoken. And if the symbols appear on your skin, some claim you won't last the night, because the woods always want their own back. It was nearly midnight when Mark blinked against the fluorescent glare of the gas station. "Wait here," his wife, Ellen, said. Her voice carried a hint of unease he hadn't noticed before. She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking on the cracked concrete, and disappeared toward the station's dimly lit restroom. Mark finished pumping gas, turning to wave at her. But she never returned. The door remained closed. The hum of the neon sign flickered above him. The wind whispered across the asphalt. And then, silence. He ran toward the building, heart hammering, calling her name. But the restroom was empty. Not a trace. Not a struggle. Only Ellen's purse lying on the sink. She was gone. Ellen was careful, observant, the kind of person who noticed things most people overlooked. She had always been attentive, whether crossing a busy street or noticing changes in the clouds before a storm. She was friendly, independent, and cautious, traits that made her the perfect traveling companion for Mark. They had just been married. It was their first cross-country trip together, driving from their hometown in Ohio to California, excited to see the country. Yet, Ellen had expressed unease before the journey. "These highways," she said one night, "they're too empty sometimes. It's like they stretch forever with nothing but the wind and the trees. Makes me uneasy." Mark had laughed it off. "Don't worry. Nothing's going to happen. It's just us and the road." But now, standing alone under the flickering neon, Mark realized she wasn't exaggerating. Hours passed. Mark called the gas station attendant, explained the situation, and searched the aisles. No one had seen Ellen leave. The highway outside was empty. The pump stood idle, the snack shelves untouched, the fluorescent lights flickering as if breathing in sync with his panic. He asked passing travelers. They shrugged. Some nodded politely. None had seen a woman walking toward the restrooms, let alone vanish. As night deepened, Mark noticed something strange. There were tire tracks around the lot, only one set, his car. But behind the building, near the trees lining the highway, the grass looked disturbed. Not footprints, as if someone had simply disappeared mid-step. His throat tightened. The stories Ellen had teased about. Ghostly women on lonely highways, vanishing travelers, rushed unbidden into his mind. He tried to laugh, but the sound caught in his chest. He called the police, who arrived hours later. They questioned him. Searched the area. Searched the rest stop. Found nothing. Ellen had simply vanished. Days turned into weeks. Investigators combed the stretch of interstate. Flyers were posted at every gas station, diner, and motel within 50 miles. The case became a whisper among locals. The young woman who disappeared at the Kerrville gas station. Rumors started. People spoke of a shadowy figure seen in the restroom mirror. Travelers swore they glimpsed a woman staring at the pumps, frozen, as if confused. Mark tried to move on. He built a life without her, but the memory haunted him. Every time he drove a stretch of highway, his eyes flicked to the rest stops, the empty lots, the dark patches of trees. He swore he could feel her presence behind him, just beyond the fog. Friends told him he should let it go. But Mark knew better. He had seen it, the way the lot fell silent, the way the air changed, like the world itself was holding its breath. No one could explain it. Not the police. Not the locals. Ellen had simply vanished. 6 years later, the same gas station. Mark was there, older now, staring at the pumps he hadn't dared approach in decades. A storm had rolled in, rain lashing the asphalt, neon signs reflecting in puddles. And then he saw her. Ellen, soaked to the bone, clutching the same worn purse she had the night she disappeared. She staggered toward the restroom, her hair plastered to her face, eyes wide and disoriented. "Ellen?" Mark whispered. She turned slowly. It's only been 5 minutes," she said, voice shaking. That's all the time that passed. She couldn't explain it. The authorities were baffled. Her hair and clothes were wet, but the storm hadn't yet reached this stretch of the highway. Her watch was still the one she wore the night she disappeared. She had aged in no way. Her skin, her eyes, her hands, untouched by time. It was as if she had never left that night at the gas station. Mark tried to embrace her. She flinched. Her eyes darted toward the highway. "There are figures," she whispered. "Waiting. On the roadside. They want me to go back." Since that night, Ellen has refused to leave her home. The police, the media, and even psychologists tried to help. They visited her house. They suggested therapy. But every time someone approached the door, she panicked, screaming about the figures waiting for her. Mark moved back in with her, but even he noticed the unease in her eyes. She watches the road through the blinds at all hours, refusing to step outside. Neighbors tell strange stories. They hear tapping at the windows late at night. Sometimes, when the fog rolls in, a woman is seen walking along the edge of the interstate, clutching a purse, disoriented, staring straight ahead. The gas station is still there, closed now, a relic of the past. Travelers speak of a woman who vanishes and reappears, warning of unseen figures. And those who get too close, some say the highway whispers. The trees sway in impossible patterns. Tires squeal with no car in sight. A soft voice calls your name. Ellen never goes back. But she knows they are waiting. And one day, they may take her again.